Section 38 of A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Diana Meilinger. A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 4, by Henry Charles LEA. Book 8, Spheres of Action. Chapter 9, Witchcraft. Part 1. The culmination of sorcery was witchcraft, and yet it was not the same. In it there is no longer talk of a pact with the demon, express or tacit, to obtain certain results, with the expectation of washing out the sin in the confessional, and thus cheating the devil. The witch has abandoned Christianity, has renounced her baptism, has worshipped Satan as her god, has surrendered herself to him, body and soul, and exists only to be his instrument in working the evil to her fellow creatures, which he cannot accomplish without a human agent. That such a being should excite universal detestation was inevitable, and that no effort should be spared for her extermination was the plainest duty of legislator and judge. There are no pages of European history more filled with horror than those which record the witch madness of 3 centuries, from the 15th to the 18th. No land was more exposed to the contagion of this insanity than Spain, where, for more than 100 years, it was constantly threatening to break forth. That it was repressed and rendered comparatively harmless was due to the wisdom and firmness of the Inquisition. This witch madness was essentially a disease of the imagination, created and stimulated by the persecution of witchcraft. Wherever the inquisitor or civil magistrate went to destroy it by fire, a harvest of witches sprang up around his footsteps. If some old crone repaid ill treatment with a curse, and the cow of the offender chanced to die, or his child to fall sick, she was marked as a witch. The judge had no difficulty in compelling such confession as he desired, and in obtaining a goodly list of accomplices. Every one who had met with ill luck hurried forward with his suspicions and accusations. Every prosecution widened the circle, until nearly the whole population might become involved, to be followed by executions numbered, not by the score, but by the 100, in blind obedience to the scriptural injunction, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." All destructive elemental disturbances, droughts or flood, tempests or hailstorms, famine or pestilence, were ascribed to witchcraft, and victims were sought, as though to offer propitiatory holocausts to the infernal gods, or expiatory sacrifices to the Creator. Belief in witchcraft was of comparatively recent origin, dating from the middle of the 14th century. Malignant sorcery had been known before, but the distinctive feature of the Sabbat first makes its appearance at this period, the midnight gathering to which the devotees of Satan were carried through the air, where they renounced Christ and worshipped their master, in the shape usually of a goat, but sometimes in that of a handsome or hideous man; where they feasted and danced and indulged in promiscuous intercourse, accommodating demons serving as incubi or succubi, and were conveyed back home, where other demons, assuming their shape, had protected their absence from observation. The development of this myth would seem ascribable to the increasing rigor of persecution towards the end of the 14th century, when, as we have seen, the University of Paris formulated the theory that pact with Satan was inherent in all magic, leading judges, in their eager exploration of cases brought before them, to connect this assumed pact with an old belief of night riders through the air, who swept along in gathering hosts. With the methods in use, the judge or the inquisitor would have little difficulty in finding what he sought. When once such a belief was disseminated by trials and executions, the accused would seek to escape endless torture by framing confessions in accordance with leading questions, and thus a tolerably coherent, though sometimes discordant formula was developed, to which witches in every land were expected to conform. That this was a new development is shown by the demonologists of the 15th century. Nider and Jacquerus, Sprenger and Bernardo da Como, treating witches as a new sect, unknown before that age, and to this Innocent VIII impliedly gave the sanction of the Holy See in his well-known bull Summis Desiderantes in 1484. This rapidly growing belief in the power of witchcraft and the duty of its extermination were stimulated by nearly every pope for almost 100 years. By Eugenius IV in 1437 and 1445, by Calixtus III in 1457, by Pius II in 1459, and, after the special utterance of Innocent VIII, by Alexander VI in 1494, by Julius II, by Leo X in 1521, by Adrian VI in 1523, and by Clement VII in 1524. While, for the most part, the so-called confessions of witches under trial were the result of the tortures so unsparingly employed, there can be little doubt that at least a portion were truthful accounts of illusions really entertained. Even as the trances and visions of the mystics, such as Santa Teresa and the Venerable Maria de Agreda, are attributable to auto-hypnotism and auto-suggestion, so, when the details of the Sabbath were thoroughly established, and became as much a part of popular belief as the glories seen in mystic ecstasy, it is easy to understand how certain temperaments, seeking escape from the sordid miseries of laborious poverty, might acquire the power of inducing trances in which the transport to the meeting-place, the devil-worship, and the sensual delights that followed, were impressed upon the imagination as realities. The demonographers give us ample accounts of experiments in which the suspected witch was thrown into a trance by the inunction of her ointment, and, on awaking, gave a detailed account of her attendance on the Sabbath and what she did and saw there. This should be borne in mind when following the long debate between those who upheld the reality of the Sabbath and those who argued that it was generally or always a delusion. To appreciate the attitude of the Spanish Inquisition in this debate, the origin of the myth must be understood. The flying by night of female sorcerers to places of assemblage was an ancient belief, entertained by Hindus, Jews, and the classical nations. This was handed down through the Middle Ages, but was regarded by the Church as a relic of paganism to be suppressed. There was an utterance, not later than the 9th century, which denounced as an error induced by the devil the popular belief that wicked women ride through the air at night under the leadership of Diana and Herodias, wherefore priests everywhere were commanded to disabuse the faithful, and to teach that those who professed to take part in these nocturnal excursions were deluded by dreams inspired by the demon, so that he who believed in their reality entertained the faith of the devil and not that of God. This utterance was ascribed to an otherwise unknown council of Anquira. It passed through all the collections of canons, Regino, Burchard, and Ivo, found a place finally in the authoritative Decretum of Gratian, where it became known to the canonists as the Canon Episcopi. When, therefore, in the 15th century, there was formulated the perfected theory of the witches' Sabbath, it had to struggle for existence. No theologian stood higher than San Antonio, Archbishop of Florence, yet in his instructions to confessors he requires them to ascertain from penitents whether they believe that women can be transformed into cats, can fly by night and suck the blood of children, all of which he says is impossible, and to believe it is folly. Nor was he alone in this, for similar instructions are given by Angelo da Chivasso and Bartolomeo de Chemie in their authoritative manuals. The new school could only meet the definitions of the Canon Episcopi by asserting that witchcraft was the product of a new sect, more pernicious than all former inventions of the demon. This brought on a warm discussion between lawyers like Pontibinio on the one side and papal theologians on the other, such as Sylvester Prerias, master of the Sacred Palace, and his successor Bartolomeo Spina, and the authority of the Holy See triumphed over skepticism. Spain, in the 15th century, lay somewhat out of the currents of European thought, and the new doctrine as to the Sabbath found only gradual acceptance there. Alfonso Tostado, Bishop of Avila, the most learned Spanish theologian of the time, in 1436, treats the Sabbath as a delusion caused by the inunction of drugs, but subsequently he argues away the canon episcopi and says that the truth is proved by innumerable cases and by the judicial penalties inflicted. Even so bigoted and credulous a writer as Alonso de Espina treats it as a delusion wrought by the demon to whom the witch has given herself, and so does Cardinal Torquemada in his commentary on the Decretum. Martin de Arles, canon of Pampeluna, speaks of the Broje, who flourished principally in the Basque provinces, north of the Pyrenees. The belief in them he treats as a false opinion, and quotes the canon episcopi as authoritatively proving it to be a delusion. At the same time, he admits that sorcerers can ligature married folk, can injure men and devastate their fields and harvests, which are works of the demon operating through them. Bernardo Bazin, of Saragossa, who had studied in Paris, took a middle ground. The Council of Anquira is not authoritative. In some causes they may be illusions sent by the demon, in others the Sabbath is a reality. In 1494, the Repertorium Inquisitorium recognizes the existence of witches, who were popularly known as Jorguinas. It quotes the essential portion of the Canon Episcopi in answer to the question whether they are justiciable by the Inquisition, adding that such a belief is an illusion wrought by the demon, but, although it is folly, it is infidelity worse than paganism, and can be prosecuted as heresy. The Inquisition itself could have no doubt as to its powers. If the Sabbath was true, the witch was an apostate; if a delusion, she was a heretic, and in either case subject to its jurisdiction. This reference to Jorguinas shows that witches were already well known in Spain, and we can assume from subsequent developments that their principal seat was in the mountainous districts along the Pyrenees, penetrating perhaps from France and favored by the ignorance of the population, its sparseness and poverty. The earliest case, however, that I have met of prosecution by the Inquisition was in 1498, when Gracia Lavalle was burnt in Saragossa. This was followed in 1499 by the burning of Maria, wife of Garcia Biesa, and in January 1500 by that of 3 women, Nanavina, Estefabrita, and Marieta, wife of Aznar Perez. There was an interval then until 1512, when there were 2 victims, Martina Gen and Maria de Arubes. There was no other in Saragossa until 1522, when Sancha de Arbues suffered, and the last one in the record is Catalina de Juan Diaz in 1535. Persecution would seem to be more active in Biscay, for Llorente quotes from a contemporary manuscript a statement that in 1507 there were burned there more than 30 witches, leading Martin de Arles y Indosilla to write a learned treatise on the subject, printed in Paris in 1517. It would seem that, in 1517, there was a persecution on foot in Catalonia, for the Barcelona inquisitors were ordered to visit the mountainous districts, especially in the diocese of Urgel, to publish edicts against the witches and to prosecute them with all rigor. Doubtless there were other developments of which no trace has reached us, and there was every prospect that Spain would be the seat of an epidemic of witchcraft, which, if fostered by persecution, would rival the devastation commencing throughout the rest of Europe. The time had scarce come for a change of policy, but there is a manifestation of a spirit of doubt and inquiry, very different from the unreasoning ferocity prevalent elsewhere. Arnaldo Albertino tells that, in 1521, at Saragossa, by command of Cardinal Adrian, he was called in consultation by the Suprema over 2 cases when he pronounced the Sabbath to be a delusion. Possibly one of these cases might have been the woman who, we have seen, was burnt at Saragossa in 1522, but the effect of such a discussion is visible, in this same year 1522, in an Edict of Grace, addressed to the witches of Jaca and Ribagorza, granting them 6 months in which to come forward and confess their offences. Considering that, about this time, Leo X and Adrian VI were vigorously promoting the massacre by wholesale of witches in the Lombardo-Venetian valleys, and resenting any interference with the operation of the inquisitors, such action on the part of the Suprema is of marked significance. It evidently felt the matter to be one requiring the most careful consideration, and, on the outbreak of the witch craze in Navarre, stimulated by the secular authorities, it assembled, in 1526, a congregation in Granada, laid the papers before it, and asked its examination of the whole subject, which was condensed into 6 questions, going to the root of the matter. 1. Whether witches really commit the crimes confessed, or whether they are deluded. 2. Whether, if these crimes are really committed, the culprits are to be reconciled and imprisoned, or to be delivered to the secular arm. 3. Whether, if they deceive and do not commit these things, they are to be similarly punished or otherwise. 4. Whether the cognizance of these crimes pertains to the Inquisition, and if so, whether this is fitting. 5. Whether the accused are to be judged on their confessions without further evidence, and to be condemned to the ordinary punishment. 6. What will be a wholesome remedy to extirpate the pest of these witches? The mere submission to rational discussion of such a series of questions shows a desire to reach a just method of treatment, wholly at variance with practice elsewhere, when legislators and judges were solely occupied with devising schemes to fight the devil with his own weapons, and to convict, per fas et nefas, the unfortunates who chanced to incur suspicion. End of Section 38.